EVO.
Welcome back to the Ides of April. This is the shot heard round the world, the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, Part 2. Chapter 4, The Plotters. If you believe in destiny, then June 28, 1914 is your proof that it's cruel. If you don't, well, it's still proof that chaos occasionally hires a driver. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand wasn't the work of a master conspiracy. It was the work of amateurs, sick, scared, idealistic boys. The kind of people history often forgets until it can't. Their leader, if you can call him that, was Dragutin Dmitrievich, known by the codename Apis, the head of the Serbian military intelligence and one of the founders of the Black Hand. Apis believed the Serbian nation was destined to unite all South Slavs, and that violence was both the path and the price. He'd already helped orchestrate one assassination, the 1903 murder of Serbia's King Alexander and Queen Draga, a coup carried out with swords, pistols, and the kind of fury that still haunted the men who survived it. By 1914, Apis had grown into something like a Balkan myth, part patriot, part fanatic. When word reached him that the Archduke would visit Sarajevo, he didn't hesitate. He saw opportunity wrapped in inevitability. The heir to the Habsburg throne would be traveling through the most volatile region in Europe on a day of immense symbolic weight with minimal protection. He didn't just approve the plot, he encouraged it. The recruits were children of poverty and feverish idealism. Gavrilo Princip, Nedjelko Kabrinović, Trifko Gabrev, and 3 others. They trained for weeks in the Serbian countryside, learning to shoot, learning to throw bombs, basically learning to die. Princip was the most serious of them, thin, tubercular, introspective, a poet in a world that no longer had time for poetry. He'd grown up under Austro-Hungarian rule, angry at the humiliation of being treated as a lesser people. He devoured nationalist literature, he whispered revolutionary oaths, and he convinced himself that killing one man could awaken an entire nation. Now, it's easy to dismiss him as delusional, but it's harder when you realize how young he was. 19, with lungs full of disease and a heart full of destiny. The conspirators crossed the border from Belgrade to Bosnia with pistols, grenades, and, if it came to it, cyanide pills. They were smuggled by railway workers who either believed in the cause or just didn't care enough to ask questions. They reached Sarajevo in early June and scattered throughout the city, blending in among the students and street vendors. None of them had experience, none of them had an escape plan, and their instructions were vague. The timing was uncertain. Even their weapons were unreliable. They had outdated pistols and crudely made hand grenades that were as likely to kill the thrower as they were to kill the target. But they had one advantage. They were invisible. No one saw them because no one expected them. Franz Ferdinand's visit to Sarajevo was meant to be ceremonial, just a routine inspection of troops and an act of goodwill towards Bosnia. There were parades planned, speeches prepared, and not a single armored car in sight. The Archduke and Sophie arrived at the train station that morning and were greeted by local officials and soldiers in pressed uniforms. Franz Ferdinand, tall and imposing, wore his full dress uniform, complete with medals, a plumed hat, just a walking fucking target. His motorcade began its journey through the streets of Sarajevo. The people there were cheering. Well, they were cheering politely, not warmly or loudly, but politely. Then along the Appel Quay, the assassins waited. They were spaced along the route like beads on a string. Each carried the same weapon, the same poison, and the same sense of purpose. Right around 10:10 a.m., Nedjelko Kabrinović threw his bomb. but he missed. As mentioned, the device bounced off the Archduke's car and exploded under the next one, wounding a bunch of the officers. The Archduke's driver sped forward, the rest of the motorcade followed. Gavrilo swallowed his cyanide and jumped into the river. Cyanide was old, the river was too shallow. He threw up, then he started flailing around, was dragged out, got the shit beat out of him, and then got arrested. The remaining conspirators scattered, believing the plot had failed. Franz Ferdinand continued on to City Hall, angry but alive. He interrupted the mayor's welcoming speech with a hissed rebuke. "Mr. Mayor, we come to visit and they throw bombs at us? It's outrageous." Afterward, against all logic, he insisted on continuing his schedule. Yeah, he wanted to visit the wounded officers in the hospital. So, the motorcade was reassembled. But no one told the driver that the route had been changed. And so, at 10:45 a.m., the Archduke's car took a wrong turn onto Franz Joseph Street, directly past Moritz Schiller's cafe, where a young, despondent Gavrilo Princip happened to be standing, just eating a sandwich. It's one of history's cruelest details, the kind that makes you question the very nature of chance. Princip hadn't been following the motorcade. He was just there, at the right moment, on that street. The driver realized the mistake, hit the brakes, and started to reverse. Princip stepped forward, drew his pistol, and fired 2 shots. One struck Sophie in the abdomen, the other hit the Archduke in the neck. Franz Ferdinand turned to his wife and he whispered, "Sophie, don't die. Stay alive for our children." But moments later, they were both gone. It had taken 6 men, 3 guns, and 1 huge mistake. And it would take 20 million lives to pay for it. Chapter 5. The shot heard round the world. There are days when the world changes all at once. Not gradually, not gently, but with a sound. For Europe, that sound was 2 gunshots fired on a street in Sarajevo. Franz Ferdinand and Sophie lay dying in the back seat of their open touring car as it raced toward the governor's residence. The Archduke's uniform was soaked in blood. He was pale, he was gasping, his hand pressed against his neck. "Sophie, don't die. Stay alive for our children," again and again, as if the words alone could rewind fate. By the time they reached the building, they were both dead. Sarajevo went silent. Not really in mourning, but in confusion. No one quite believed that it had actually happened. The local police scrambled, the soldiers panicked, the city's newspapers even, they hesitated before printing what everyone knew was the truth. When the cables reached Vienna, the emperor's advisors thought it was a hoax. But then came the confirmation. The heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, dead. His wife, dead. The assassin, alive. Gavrilo Princip was seized immediately. He tried to turn the pistol on himself, but the crowd wouldn't let him. He was beaten up, dragged through the streets, and then thrown into custody. When interrogated, he declared he had acted, quote, "for my people." He was just 19 years old, thin, malnourished, and carried tuberculosis. He didn't look like the man who would start a world war. But appearances are for peacetime. The news traveled by telegram faster than any rumor had before. Within hours, every capital in Europe knew. By nightfall, the world had already given it a name: the Sarajevo outrage. In Vienna, the royal court went into ritualized mourning. Flags were lowered, black crepe draped the palace halls. The emperor, Franz Joseph, hardly said anything. His relationship with his nephew had been strained, even cold. "A higher power has restored order," he muttered, not in grief, but in resignation. But the generals and ministers around him were far less restrained. They didn't see a tragedy. They saw an opportunity. To them, this assassination was a gift, a pretext to punish Serbia once and for all, to reassert imperial dominance in the Balkans. Within days, Austria's foreign minister Leopold von Berchtold and chief of staff Konrad von Hotzendorf began drafting their response. Not condolences, not inquiry. Retaliation. In Serbia, the government braced for the worst. The link between the assassins and the Black Hand, and by extension, the entire Serbian military intelligence, was thin, but dangerous. Serbia condemned the killing. They arrested more suspected conspirators and offered to cooperate with Vienna. But it didn't matter. The Austrians wanted war. On July 23, 1914, nearly a month after the shooting, Austria delivered an ultimatum to Serbia. 10 demands, and most of them were designed to be completely unacceptable. Serbia was to suppress all anti-Austrian propaganda, dissolve nationalist organizations, arrest anyone involved in the assassination, and most insulting of all, allow Austrian officials to conduct their own investigation on Serbian soil. Serbia accepted 9 out of 10. It wasn't enough. 3 days later, Austria declared war, and the dominoes began to fall in perfect mechanical sequence. Russia, seeing itself as the protector of Slavs, began to mobilize to defend Serbia. Germany, bound by its alliance with Austria, declared war on Russia. France, allied with Russia, declared war on Germany. And when German troops violated Belgian neutrality on their way to France, Britain declared war on Germany. In less than a week, every major power in Europe was at war, all because one teenager with a pistol wanted to make history. So the irony here is cruel and complete. Franz Ferdinand had been one of the few high-ranking Austrians opposed to war with Serbia. He had favored a loose federation of nations within an empire, autonomy, not annihilation. His death silenced the one man who might have stopped the very conflict that his murder inspired. The men who pulled the trigger and the men who wrote the ultimatums shared the same delusion, that violence could purify, that blood could restore order, that death could somehow make sense of life. The summer of 1914 was glorious, bright, cloudless, full of parades and promises. Then came August, and the trenches began to form. No one could have known how quickly civilization would decay. By winter, the fields of Europe were torn apart. By spring, the rivers ran red. The war that began with a handful of bullets in Sarajevo would consume 20 million lives and end 4 empires: the Austro-Hungarian, the Russian, the German, and the Ottoman. Princip never saw any of it. Too young for the death penalty, he was sentenced to 20 years in prison. He died of tuberculosis in 1918, chained to a wall, weighing barely 80 pounds, just weeks before the war ended. He had dreamed of freedom. He got a world in ruin. The Archduke and Sophie were buried quietly in their country estate, far from the grandeur of Vienna. The empire didn't want martyrs. It wanted excuses, and it found them. From their graves, 2 ordinary people, a husband and wife, became the first casualties of the most extraordinary catastrophe the modern world had ever seen.
If your dog could talk, they'd beg for Ollie. The full-body tail wag, the excited little hops, the big, goofy grin, that's the Ollie effect. Ollie delivers clean, fresh nutrition in 5 drool-worthy flavors, even for the pickiest eaters. Made in U.S. kitchens with highest quality human-grade ingredients, Ollie's food contains no fillers, no preservatives, just real food. And here's the thing. Healthier food means a happier pup, more energy, shinier coats, and more excitement at mealtime. With 5 protein-packed recipes like fresh beef with sweet potatoes or fresh turkey with blueberries, even the pickiest eaters can't resist. You might think my dog eats better than I do, and that's probably true when it comes to Ollie. Get your welcome kit. For any first-timers, Ollie will send out your pup's first box with 2 weeks' worth of meals, a free storage container for mess-free serving, and a guide of how to gradually switch them over to their new diet. Dogs deserve the best, and that means fresh, healthy food. Head to ollie.com/IDES. Tell them all about your dog and use code IDES to get 60% off your welcome kit when you subscribe today. Plus, they offer a happiness guarantee on the first box, so if you're not completely satisfied, you'll get your money back. That's OLLIE.com/IDES and enter IDES to get 60% off your first box. Quick question. Could you list every financial account you have right now? Your 401k, checking, savings, investments, maybe even that old retirement account from a job 10 years ago? Most people can't. And that lack of awareness usually means money is being left on the table. That's where Monarch Money comes in. It's an all-in-one personal finance tool that organizes your entire financial life in one clean dashboard on your phone or laptop. In minutes, you can link all your accounts, see where your money is going, and get smart visuals that make the big picture clear. No more juggling apps, no more spreadsheets. Monarch is designed for people with busy lives. It helps you save more, invest smarter, and actually feel in control of your money. That's why it's been named Best Budgeting App of 2025 by the Wall Street Journal, Forbes Best App for Couples, and even recognized by CNBC as one of the top fintech companies in the world. So stop guessing, stop leaving money on the table, and start feeling confident about your finances. Don't let financial opportunity slip through the cracks. Use code IDES at monarchmoney.com in your browser for half off your first year. That's 50% off your first year at monarchmoney.com with code IDES.
Chapter 6. The War to End All Wars. So the world went to war, and no one really knew why. They said it was for honor, for alliances, for civilization. But it was really for nothing. Or for everything, depending on how you measure tragedy. When the first shots were fired in August 1914, men marched into battle wearing bright uniforms, carrying flags, singing songs about glory. They thought it would be over by Christmas, that they'd be home in time for the next harvest. Instead, they were swallowed whole by the century. The war that began with 2 bullets in Sarajevo became an industrial process for killing. Europe had never seen anything like it, and hasn't since. Machine guns turned fields into slaughterhouses. Artillery erased entire villages from the map. Poison gas rolled through trenches, silent and invisible, killing slowly and without distinction. Cavalry charges met barbed wire. Valor met reality. The romance of battle died somewhere in the frozen fields outside of Verdun. From 1914 to 1918, over 20 million people were killed. Soldiers, civilians, children. The empires that had ruled the world for centuries collapsed like rotting scaffolding. Russia fell into revolution. Austria-Hungary fractured into pieces. Germany starved under blockade. The Ottoman Empire finally dissolved into dust. By the end, the maps of Europe had to be redrawn by men who had no idea what they were doing. The Treaty of Versailles, signed in 1919, was supposed to be a blueprint for peace. It was a funeral. It punished Germany so severely that revenge became inevitable. The phrase, "the war to end all wars," was meant to sound hopeful. It aged badly. At the peace conferences, the leaders spoke of new beginnings, self-determination, democracy even, the end of empire. But beneath their optimism lay the same old rot. Humiliation, resentment, economic ruin. The generation that had survived the trenches returned to a world that didn't know what to do with them. The young were gone, the old were broken, and the future was already bargaining with fascism. The war had ended, and the century of war had just begun. Gavrilo Princip died in that cell before he could see the world that he'd made. The Archduke's children lived in quiet exile. Their father remembered less for who he was than for what his death had caused. The Balkans, that fragile crossroad of empires, remained what it had always been, a fuse waiting for a spark. It's easy to see World War I as ancient history, but the truth is it never really ended. Its borders became ours. Its resentments became ideologies. Its weapons evolved, but its logic stayed the same. The lesson that one act of violence can destroy everything was learned, forgotten, and learned again. When the smoke cleared in 1918, Europe told itself it had seen the end of barbarism. But 21 years later, it saw it again. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand was not the cause of the war. It was the excuse for the war. The world had been building toward it for decades. Militarism, nationalism, imperial arrogance, and fear all piled into a single powder keg. Princip just lit the match, and that's the real story. Not of a man or an empire, but of momentum, of what happens when nations forget their fragility and mistake pride for strength. The Archduke's car, the gun, the cafe, hell, the sandwich, the wrong turn, they're all gone now. But the sound they made still echoes. You can hear it in every war that followed, every treaty that failed, every generation that believed it was smarter than the last. It's the sound of history clearing its throat. It's the sound of the modern world being born. It's the sound of the 20th century learning what it's capable of. And all it took was a man, a moment, and a mistake. Follow the Ides of April on Instagram at Ides of April Pod. For press and inquiries, email us at info@evocreative.com. Rate, review, and follow the Ides of April wherever you get your podcasts. Support our sponsors. Take the online quiz and introduce Ollie to your pet at ollie.com/Ides for 60% off your first box. And use code Ides at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. Thanks for joining me on the Ides of April. This has been The Shot Heard Round the World, the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. If you like the episode, please consider sharing it with a friend. And make sure you're following the Ides of April on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts, because history doesn't repeat itself, it reloads. The Devil Within is an EVO production, recorded live at Bel Air Studios in Los Angeles, California. For The Devil Within, I'm your host, Branden Morgan.